The Utah Canyon stretched wide and silent beneath a September sky. Towers of red sandstone rose like ancient cathedrals, their shadows deepening as the sun climbed. To stand at the rim was to feel both awe and unease, the beauty undeniable, but the emptiness overwhelming. Canyons are deceptive. They draw people in with the promise of wonder, but they keep secrets, and once a life slips into that silence, the desert rarely gives it back. The four friends who set out that weekend thought of beauty, not danger, for them. It was meant to be nothing more than one last adventure before the next chapter of their lives began. They were all students, tied together by years of late nights, study sessions, and weekend escapes. This trip was supposed to be a memory, not a mystery. Michael, at 24, was the planner, an environmental science major with a restless love of the outdoors. He was the one who suggested the trip in the first place. His friends trusted him because he always seemed to know where he was going, both on maps and in life. His backpack was heavy with trail guides, rope, and gear he insisted they might need. Rachel, 23, was in nursing school. She had a calming presence, the kind of person who could ease tension with a smile. She was the caretaker of the group, carrying a small first aid kit, extra snacks, and always asking if anyone needed water, where Michael led. Rachel made sure everyone was cared for. Luis, 24, studied engineering. He was practical, steady, and quietly protective of his friends. If something broke, Luis fixed it. If someone doubted their footing, Luis offered his hand. He carried tools, extra batteries, even duct tape, because you never know when it might save you. His friends joked he was overprepared, but no one complained. And then there was Jenna, the youngest at 22, an art student with an eye for beauty others overlooked. While her friends took quick photos on their phones, Jenna pulled out her sketchbook, tracing the lines of cliffs and the curve of desert plants. Her drawings made each trip feel like a story captured in graphite and ink. She carried her journal everywhere, her handwriting looping across the pages in notes about the world around her. That Friday morning, the four loaded Michael's SUV with gear, laughter, and anticipation. Their destination, a remote Utah canyon known for its stark beauty and quiet trails. It was dangerous terrain, steep cliffs, sudden storms, and the ever-present threat of flash floods. But Michael had researched the routes and assured them they'd be safe before they lost service. They posted photos to social media, for young faces grinning against the backdrop of red rock and endless sky. The caption read, "Weekend escape, back Monday." It was the last time anyone ever heard from them. The ranger on duty that weekend remembered their vehicle. He saw the SUV parked neatly at the trailhead, logged it as routine. Dozens of cars lined the lot every weekend, their owners trekking into the canyons for adventure. Nothing seemed unusual, but when he closed his shift that evening, he noticed something strange. The group had not signed the registry. Most hikers did. These four had not. When Monday evening came and passed with no return, families began to worry. Messages went unanswered. Phones went straight to voicemail. At first, there was hope. Maybe they had extended the trip. Maybe they were out of range. But when Tuesday morning came and still no word, panic set in. Parents called the ranger station, voices trembling as they explained, "Our kids should have been back yesterday." The search began immediately. Helicopters swept low over the canyon, rotors chopping through the silence. Drones traced narrow trails, dipping between cliffs where human eyes could not see. Search dogs were brought to the trailhead, their noses pressed to the clothes pulled from the SUV. But on the paths, the dogs faltered. They circled, whined, and laid down as if confused by the vastness of the desert air. Volunteers arrived by the dozens. Townspeople, classmates, strangers who had seen the news, all combed the canyon floor, walking in long lines, probing the sand with poles, calling out the names that had echoed through campus halls only days before. Michael, Rachel, Luis, Jenna. The names bounced back in hollow echoes, swallowed by the walls of stone. Days stretched into a week. The searchers covered miles of ground, rappelling into narrow slots, dragging the dry beds of creeks, scanning ridges with binoculars. They found nothing, no fire pits, no collapsed tents, no scattered wrappers or clothing, no footprints in the sand. The canyon floor was smooth, empty, as if no one had ever walked there. The SUV was towed from the trailhead, still half full of gas, its doors locked. Inside, the cooler held uneaten food. A spare sketchbook of Jenna's lay on the back seat. Everything in order, everything ordinary, except for the absence of the four who had driven it there. Reporters descended on the scene. Headlines spread quickly. 4 college friends missing in Utah Canyon. Their smiling social media photos were plastered across national news. Interviews with professors and classmates painted them as bright, kind, and full of promise. Families spoke to cameras with tears in their eyes, begging for answers. The official search lasted 2 weeks. Helicopters returned day after day. Volunteers covered every known trail. Experts studied maps and warned of flash floods, of sheer cliffs where a single misstep could prove fatal. But there was no evidence of an accident, no gear, no remains, nothing. By the time the search was suspended, silence had settled over the canyon once more. But it was no longer the silence of untouched wilderness. It was the silence of a place that had taken something and refused to return it. Theories swirled. Some said the 4 had fallen victim to the canyon itself, swept away in a sudden flood. Their remains hidden in caves and crevices. Others whispered of foul play, that someone had been waiting out there, unseen, and the students had stumbled into danger. But none of the theories changed the truth, for friends had gone in together, and none ever came out. The first weeks after the official search ended were filled with denial. Parents refused to accept that 4 young students could vanish without a trace. They replayed possibilities endlessly. Maybe the group had gotten trapped in a cave. Maybe they had been swept into a hidden gorge. Maybe they were still out there, waiting to be rescued. Every ring of the phone jolted them upright. Every unknown caller ID carrying the desperate hope it might be one of their children. But the days rolled into months, and hope, though fierce, grew thinner. The first anniversary of the disappearance was marked by candles, flowers, and tears at the college campus. Hundreds gathered in front of the library steps, where classmates held photographs of Michael, Rachel, Luis, and Jenna. Professors stood shoulder to shoulder with students, and parents wept openly as stories were told. Michael's curiosity, Rachel's compassion, Luis's quiet determination, Jenna's laughter and sketches. Their personalities were painted vividly, as if speaking them aloud might keep them alive. The vigils became a tradition. Each September, classmates and professors gathered again, even as years passed and new students filled the dorms. At first, the crowds were large, but as time moved on, the numbers dwindled. By the 5th year, only family, a handful of old friends, and a few sympathetic strangers lit candles. By the 12th year, it was often only the parents, standing in silence, clutching each other's hands, watching the flames flicker against the night. For the families, grief became a prison. Each set of parents responded differently, but none escaped its grip. Rachel's parents left her bedroom untouched, her stethoscope still hanging on the chair, her notebooks neatly stacked, as if she might return any day to study. Michael's father spent years hiking in canyons across Utah, convinced he could find something the searchers had missed. Luis's younger brother carried his student ID everywhere, the worn plastic a constant reminder of the brother he idolized. And Jenna's mother baked a birthday cake for her daughter every year, placing it on an empty table with the same number of candles she would have blown out. The dorm rooms the 4 once lived in became shrines too. Students refused to take down the photos and mementos left on the doors. New residents placed flowers and notes inside, writing small letters. "We remember you. You should have graduated with us." For classmates who moved on, the missing friends became frozen in memory, always young, always smiling, always ready for one more adventure. Theories filled the silence that stretched across the years. Practical voices suggested accidents. The canyon was full of danger. Sheer cliffs where one wrong step could mean a fall. Sudden flash floods that could sweep hikers away with terrifying force. Perhaps they had misjudged their footing. Perhaps they had set camp in a low area and a storm had come through. To many, this explanation was simple and tragic, but others weren't convinced. An accident might take 1 or 2 lives, but 4 young people at once? And to leave no trace, no torn gear, no remains, no evidence scattered in the desert? That was harder to explain away. Suspicion turned toward foul play. Perhaps they had encountered someone dangerous in the canyon. Perhaps they had trusted the wrong stranger, or crossed paths with people hiding something. And then came the myths. Hikers began to whisper about the trail where the students had vanished. It earned a new name, the Hollow Trail. The story spread in quiet voices. For college students who went in, never came out, over time, the canyon's silence took on a darker edge. People claimed the place felt wrong, too still, as if even birds avoided it. Some swore they felt watched on the trail, as if unseen eyes followed their every step. A few claimed to hear echoes at night, voices that didn't belong to their own group. The Hollow Trail became part of local folklore. Guides warned hikers to avoid certain routes. Families told children not to wander there, and for thrill seekers, it became a forbidden challenge, a place whispered about like cursed ground. Meanwhile, the internet kept the mystery alive in its own way, on Reddit and other forums. Entire threads were devoted to the case. Amateur sleuths dissected every detail. The last photo posted by the group, the Rangers log noting their SUV at the trailhead. The absence of gear. Some drew maps of potential cave systems, arguing the group had stumbled into hidden tunnels. Others claimed it was the work of a desert cult, citing unsolved disappearances across the Southwest. A few tied it to conspiracy theories about government experiments or hidden military tunnels, where witnesses vanished because they saw too much. Speculation grew more elaborate each year. Photographs of the canyon were analyzed pixel by pixel. Strangers claimed to see shapes and shadows, faint outlines on ridges. Every clue, no matter how thin, was woven into theories that stretched further from reality. For online communities, the case was entertainment, a mystery to be solved. For the families, it was salt in a wound that never healed. The emotional toll rippled through time. On campus, yearbooks became shrines. Students who graduated in the years that followed scrawled messages in the margins beside the 4 missing names. "We'll never forget you. The Hollow Trail won't silence your voices." During commencement, ribbons were tied to gowns in their honor, bright flashes of color representing futures that would never arrive. Yet for all the memorials, for all the stories and theories, the canyon remained silent. Not one new piece of evidence surfaced in 12 years. The SUV at the trailhead remained the final trace, a locked shell of a vehicle that led nowhere. The Hollow Trail had claimed 4 young lives, and for over a decade it kept its grip. For 12 years, silence clung to the canyon, until the desert itself gave something back. The canyon had kept its silence for 12 long years. Search teams had left, vigils had faded, and the story of the 4 missing students was spoken of only in whispers. Locals believed nothing new would ever surface. The desert had made its choice, and the desert never gave back what it took until the storm. A late summer downpour swept across Utah with unusual ferocity. Rain hammered the cliffs, filling dry riverbeds in minutes, turning narrow canyons into torrents of rushing water. When the skies finally cleared, the land was transformed. Walls of sandstone glistened as if freshly carved. Gullies deepened, and slopes of rock broke loose, collapsing in jagged heaps at the canyon floor. A week later, 2 hikers ventured into the region, eager to explore what the storm had uncovered. They were not searching for evidence of the missing students. They were simply curious, drawn to the fresh scars carved into the landscape. As they picked their way across boulders loosened by the rain, one of them noticed something pale wedged between the rocks. At first, it looked like bone, but when they climbed closer, they realized it was fabric, a backpack. sun-bleached and frayed. It was jammed between slabs of sandstone, as though the storm had finally shaken it free from hiding. Its straps were torn, the zipper half broken, and the fabric so brittle it crumbled at the edges when touched. Yet somehow, after 12 years, it remained intact enough to hold what lay inside. The hikers unfastened it with trembling hands. The first item they pulled out was a phone, cracked, the screen shattered, but unmistakably old. The model matched the type that had been released around the time the students vanished. Its casing was scarred, its buttons stiff with sand, but still, it was evidence. Next came a water bottle, metal, dented from years of wear, its surface scraped, but carved into its side with a pocket knife were two letters. L. R. Luis Ramirez. The hikers froze. They knew the story. Everyone in the state did. 4 students. Lost without a trace. Now, here was proof in their hands. A backpack that had belonged to them. They kept searching. Inside, wrapped carefully in cloth, were notebooks. The pages were warped but surprisingly legible. The cover bore Jenna's familiar sketches. Her initials scrawled in the corner. Flipping through, the hikers saw drawings of canyon walls, arches, and the play of light on stone. But as the pages went on, the sketches grew darker. Figures appeared, faint, shadowy forms standing on ridges, shapes that did not match rocks or trees, faces half-formed, drawn as though Jenna had glimpsed something she could not fully capture but could not ignore. One sketch in particular showed 4 figures at a campfire. In the background, higher on a ridge, loomed another figure, faceless, staring down at them. The hikers stuffed the notebooks back into the bag, unsettled, but there was more. At the bottom of the pack lay a memory card, salvaged from the broken phone. They didn't dare tamper with it themselves. They turned the backpack over to authorities, who immediately sent the items to forensic labs. Within weeks, the memory card was recovered and its contents restored. The photos were disturbing. Most were blurred images of canyon walls, taken at odd angles, perhaps by accident. A few showed the night sky, the stars smeared by motion. But then came the final frame, a single photo, grainy but unmistakable, a lone figure, standing on the ridge, tall, motionless, faceless in the blur, yet undeniably human-shaped. Experts argued the distortion could be caused by light, by the long exposure of the phone's failing camera, but those who saw it swore otherwise. The figure was too solid, too deliberate, to be a trick. The backpack's contents were confirmed to belong to the missing 4. Luis's initials carved into the water bottle, Jenna's sketches in her hand, the phone model traced back to Michael, who had purchased it 2 months before the trip. There was no doubt. This was theirs. The discovery reignited the case like wildfire. News outlets across the country carried the story. Backpack found in Utah Canyon linked to missing students. Families who had endured a decade of silence now faced a new storm of attention. Reporters camped outside their homes. Theories exploded online once more, dissecting the photo, arguing over the sketches, debating what the figure meant. But what drew the most attention was not the photo, it was the final detail. Found tucked inside one of Jenna's notebooks, a small scrap of paper, separate from her sketches, scrawled in rushed handwriting, a journal entry. The words were brief, uneven. "We're not alone out here." It was the last thing written, and deeper in the backpack was something even more disturbing. A journal entry no one was ready to read. The return of the backpack transformed the case from a closed chapter into an open wound. For a decade, the canyon had held nothing but silence. Now, forensics had evidence in their hands, and evidence has a way of speaking, even if the words it forms are unsettling. The notebooks found in the backpack were restored carefully, each page flattened and scanned. What emerged was not the whimsical art Jenna had once filled her sketchbooks with, but something far darker. In between sketches of cliffs and desert flowers were notes, fragments of a journal, written in hurried, uneven strokes, as though her hands trembled when she wrote them. The early entries were harmless enough, the thrill of reaching the canyon, Michael leading the way, Luis building fires, Rachel laughing as she tried to cook over the flames. But soon the tone shifted, voices echoing in canyon. At first thought it was us. But it isn't. The echoes come back wrong. Heard my name when no one called it. Another. Written days later. Lights moving against cliffs at night. Not stars. Not planes. They shift too close. Too steady. Like lanterns being carried. The final fragment stopped investigators cold. We think we're being followed. It wasn't paranoia written in hindsight. These were the words of a young woman documenting her fear as it unfolded. And now, 12 years later, it was all that remained of their voices. Forensic teams turned their focus to the backpack itself. It had been wedged between rocks. But what puzzled them was its state. The fabric was sun-bleached, yes, and frayed, but not nearly as deteriorated as it should have been after 12 years in the elements. Some experts suggested it had not been lying exposed all that time. Instead, it might have been hidden, deliberately placed somewhere sheltered, only to be dislodged by the recent storm. If that was true, the question became darker. Who had hidden it, and why? As the canyon was re-examined, investigators made another chilling discovery. Scattered in a shallow ravine not far from where the backpack was found were bones. At first, locals hoped they were animal remains, coyotes, perhaps, or deer, but testing confirmed otherwise. Human bones, fractured and weathered, yet still identifiable. DNA testing tied them to the missing students. 2 of them, but only 2. The remains of Michael and Rachel were confirmed. Luis and Jenna were unaccounted for. No fragments of their skeletons were found. Theories churned. Had their bones been carried away by floods? Taken by scavengers? Or was it possible, unthinkable, yet whispered, that they had survived longer than anyone realized? Investigators pressed further into the canyon and found more evidence that unsettled even seasoned searchers. Stone fire pits, blackened with ash. Not just one, but several, spread across areas beyond where the students would have camped. They were crude, not the neatly contained fires built by Luis with his engineer's precision. Some appeared older, with soot staining the rock walls above. Others looked recent, though no hikers had been reported in that area. Alongside the fire pits, soot lined the ceilings of caves nearby, the kind of soot left by repeated burning, by people who had sheltered there for weeks, months, maybe longer. Whoever had made those fires did not belong to the students. Theories shifted again. Perhaps they had stumbled upon someone living out there. Hermits, fugitives, people who had chosen the canyon's isolation for reasons unknown. If so, had those people sabotaged the group's SUV? Forensic teams returned to the SUV, long stored as evidence. When the ignition was re-examined under modern methods, a detail emerged that had been missed years before. The wires inside had not decayed naturally. They had been cut, not torn, not frayed, but sliced cleanly, deliberately. The realization hit hard. The students had not simply gotten lost. Their escape had been taken from them. Someone had made sure their vehicle would never start again. The picture that emerged was one of sabotage and terror. For friends entered the canyon, their SUV crippled before they ever knew it. They walked deeper. Unaware, they set camp. And then, the journal suggested, they began to realize they were not alone. Voices in the canyon, lights moving at night, figures that watched from ridges. Theories ran rampant. Some said the 4 had been victims of criminals, smugglers using hidden routes through the desert, ruthless toward anyone who crossed their path. Others pointed to the fire pits and soot. Perhaps an isolated community, a group living off the grid, who viewed intruders as threats. But not everyone accepted human explanations. The way Jenna described the voices, the way lights moved across cliffs, the way fear seeped into her sketches. It all sounded less like smugglers and more like something older. Locals whispered about spirits of the canyon, guardians of sacred land, or something inhuman that lingered where silence was deepest. The sheriff's office tried to frame it carefully. Evidence recovered indicates foul play. Remains identified as 2 individuals. Cause of death undetermined. Investigation ongoing. But in the town, People said what the officials would not. The canyon had taken them. Parents were shattered anew for Michael's and Rachel's families. The confirmation of bones gave some measure of truth, but it was truth without comfort for Luis's and Jenna's families. The silence was even worse. The absence of remains meant endless questions, endless possibilities, and through it all, the image of the blurred figure on the ridge, captured in that single photo from the phone, loomed larger than ever. Was it a criminal watching them? Or was it something else entirely? The canyon no longer felt like a place where 4 young lives had been lost by chance. It felt like a place where something had happened, something deliberate, something cruel, perhaps something beyond human understanding. Had they fallen into the path of criminals? Or stumbled into something inhuman, something older than the canyon itself? The canyon had given back fragments. A backpack, bones, sketches, and words written in fear, but never the full story. And so, 12 years after the disappearance, what remained was not closure, but division. Some insisted the explanation was human: sabotaged wires, hidden fire pits, soot on cave ceilings. These were the fingerprints of people, not phantoms. The theory was simple. The 4 friends stumbled into the path of criminals, hermits, or those who wished to remain unseen. They were silenced, their remains hidden, their belongings scattered. To many, the case was a tragedy of foul play, no more and no less. But others could not ignore the strangeness. The voices Jenna wrote about, the lights she sketched, the blurred figure caught in Michael's phone, the backpack preserved as though someone had hidden it on purpose. All of it suggested something beyond human hands. Locals whispered of spirits that roamed the canyons, guardians of sacred land, or entities older than memory itself. You can call it myth if you want, one rancher said quietly. But those kids weren't alone out there, and it wasn't just people they met. The divide extended through the community. Families clung to different beliefs. Michael's father remained convinced his son had been silenced by criminals. Jenna's mother believed her daughter had glimpsed something the desert was never meant to reveal. None of them had answers. All of them lived with the silence. The canyon itself, once just another rugged trail, was forever changed. People no longer called it by its official name among locals. It became Hollow Trail. The name spread quickly, whispered among hikers, printed in blog posts, etched into online maps. A trail that swallowed voices. A trail that erased 4 friends. Few dared to hike it anymore. And those who did often came back shaken. Stories multiplied. Compasses spun wildly, needles quivering without cause. Fires, carefully built, flickered and died as if the air itself refused to feed them. Shadows seemed to move along the cliffs, stretching too far, bending in ways the sun could not explain. One group swore they heard footsteps pacing outside their tent, but when they looked, the sand was undisturbed. Another claimed to hear laughter carried by the wind, faint but unmistakably human. The myths grew, feeding themselves. Was it the spirits of the 4 students, lingering where they had been taken? Or was it something else, something that had always been there, waiting? Meanwhile, the families held on to rituals. Each September, they returned to the campus memorial. Flowers were laid beside photographs. Year after year, old classmates sometimes joined them, bringing candles, though as time passed, fewer came. The trailhead, too, became a site of offerings. Hikers found bouquets tucked into crevices, ribbons tied to posts, notes written in careful hands. "You're not forgotten," inside their homes. The parents lived with absence. Rachel's stethoscope still hung on her chair. Michael's notebooks remained stacked. Luis's tools lay untouched in a box. Jenna's sketches, the ones she had drawn before the trip, were framed and hung. Silent testaments to a daughter who had tried to see the world in lines and curves. And then, as if the canyon had not finished speaking, came the final twist. A group of hikers, curious but cautious, ventured into Hollow Trail nearly a year after the backpack had been found. They did not stray far, staying close to established paths. But as they rested near a cliffside, one of them noticed markings on the stone. At first, they seemed like scratches, the kind erosion carves over centuries, but the more sand they brushed away, the clearer the markings became: letters, initials, M, R, L, J, Michael, Rachel, Luis, Jenna. The carvings were deliberate, cut deep into the rock, and beneath them was a date. The date was 5 years after the friends had vanished. The hikers stood in silence, their breath caught in their throats. If the markings were genuine, it meant someone had survived long past the point anyone believed possible, or it meant someone, or something, wanted the world to believe they had. When word of the carvings spread, debate erupted once more. Skeptics claimed they were faked, etched by thrill seekers to keep the legend alive. Believers insisted no one else could have made them, that they were proof the four had lived longer than the world knew. For the families, the discovery was another twist of the knife, a shred of hope, or another cruel reminder that truth remained buried. The canyon gave no further answers. The carvings remained, the initials etched into stone, but no other evidence followed. Hollow Trail kept its silence, and so the legacy of the four friends endures, in flowers left at memorials, in whispers traded by hikers, in endless debates online. Some say they were victims of human cruelty. Others believe they stumbled into something that lies beneath the desert's skin, something that watches from the ridges and waits for the reckless to wander too far. But the truth remains in the canyon, in the silence that has never fully spoken, because some places do not simply take lives. They keep them, waiting to remind us what was lost.